What's going on, everyone? It's Adam here from No Shelf Space, and today it's another episode of Versus. And today could have been Versus between three different games from Fantasy Flight Games, but one of them I don't have here. So it is not going to be a versus between three games. It's just going to be a versus between two games. And today's games that we're talking about are Marvel Champions and The Lord of the Rings, the card game. Both of these are living card games. There are tons of expansions for both that you can pick up and add to your experience and add to the game. But we're talking about just the core boxes for a little bit. And then we'll move on to some expansions that I've purchased for only one of these games. And by then you'll know which game I prefer. But there is a reason why you might pick this. There's a reason why you might pick that. And we're going to talk about it right now. In living card games, you're going to be having decks of cards, and you can build your own decks or use the pre-made decks, and you'll use those decks to do a variety of things. Marvel Champions, you'll be using those decks to fight off a baddie. I think Rhino is the villain that you'll be fighting. Did I call him a baddie? Rhino is the villain you're going to be fighting in the Learn to Play scenario for Marvel Champions. And Lord of the Rings is a bit more of an adventure game where you're going to be going through a bunch of different cards, traveling to locations, trying to put progress tokens down onto those locations so that you can complete them and move on. And I think that's where we're going to begin, because while these are both living card games and they are both from Fantasy Flight Games, and they are both very good, they give off different vibes. The best way I can describe it is this is an adventure game, in my opinion, and this is a boss battler. Now, you can do this in a campaign style. You can load up a bunch of villains and do a campaign style kind of game. But this feels like a better campaign game, because this feels like an adventure to me. And I'll explain why in a second. But this feels like an adventure, whereas this feels like a boss battler. Now, that doesn't mean one is necessarily better than the other. What I can tell you, though, is that I do prefer the Lord of the Rings, the card game. And to that end, I've got the Lord of the Rings, the card game core set. I've got the Lord of the Rings, the card game, the Fellowship of the Ring set. I've got the Lord of the Rings card game, the Two Tower set, and a bunch of other additional sets and character packs and things like that that I've purchased. Now, full disclosure, both of these core sets were sent to me by Fantasy Flight Games and Asmodee Canada. So these were products provided to me for review. But these two, I like this so much that these were purchased separately, although not by myself, by my father-in-law, who loves the game just as much as I do. So which game should you play? Well, it really depends. There's the first thing we're going to talk about. Are you a Marvel fan or are you a Lord of the Rings fan? Do you like a boss battling system where it's you and a friend? Maybe you're playing Spider-Man and Captain Marvel and you're going to be taking down Rhino or whoever. Does that excite you? Then this is probably what you want. And it's a very, very good boss battler living card game. You get to build that deck how you want it, putting in the cards that you want to use. There are specific character cards you have to have in your deck, but after that you can put in some neutral cards. You get to pick like a specialty, like Justice or Power, things like that you can specialize in. And that makes this a very, very fun game. And if you're a huge Marvel fan, this is a great purchase. There is so much content in this box to play, and you're going to have a blast doing it. But if you're looking for an adventure where you feel like you're doing something and you're going somewhere and you've got this goal in mind, this kind of gives it to you, in my opinion. But this does a way better job. And the reason why this does a way better job is because there's locations that you go to. Very specific locations where you're putting tokens on, trying to complete them. You're going to see locations you're familiar with. Fangorn Forest, Mirkwood. When you get into this stuff here, like the Barrow Downs and the Ford and Weathertop and Bree and the Prancing Pony, and so many cool locations to a point where, like, if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, you're going to get so much out of this box. Now, Lord of the Rings can go two ways. You can dive deep into the lore of Lord of the Rings and play as characters that you might not know from the movies or the books, the books. When I say the books, I obviously mean the trilogy and The Hobbit. But there are other things. There's the legends. There's other legends and things that Tolkien wrote in other books that show up in these core sets. Very cool stuff. Very fun. And we've been doing this Fellowship of the Ring scenario where you can pick your heroes that you're going to use. And my father-in-law are playing, so we each have 3 heroes. And you can pick whoever you want. They're not going to tie you to what actually happened in the books and the movie. So I'm using Aragorn, Boromir, and Faramir, I believe. My father-in-law is using Legolas, Eowyn, and somebody else that I can't remember. And then we're given a Frodo hero that kind of passes back between the two of us. And honestly, it just feels like an epic adventure. I feel like if I'm going to do a boss battler, now this is a personal opinion, and people are going to come into the comments and be like, you're wrong this way and that way about Marvel Champions. I like Marvel Champions. It's a good game. But if I want to play something that I feel is a boss battler, there are other boss battling games I'd probably rather play than Marvel Champions. And to be fair, I'm not a huge Marvel fan. I love the movies, but like I don't dive into the comics. I don't dive into a lot of the other, like even the TV shows I don't dive into. So I'm not as big of a Marvel fan. This one here, for me, it clicks because there's not many games, unless you're going to play like even Journeys in Middle-earth or Descent or something like that, which has a whole bunch more table presence, setup, tear down, things to track. If you want like a very simplistic but fun adventure game, this is it. Like you can get a game of this set up in minutes. Building your deck might take some time, and I'm not a deck building kind of guy, but I've managed to do it with the cards we have available. Building a deck, that's fine. It might take some time. You might even want to look up online to build a good deck. But once you've got your deck built, this is so quick, and you get that full, rich experience of playing through a campaign, going places, doing things, fighting the Witch King, fighting trolls, fighting against orcs, and all of that. And your favorite characters are popping up all over the place. In my opinion, this is the one I would recommend. I think you get a lot more out of this than you would out of this. Again, last thing I'll say, you're a Marvel fan? Here. Boss Battler? Here. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, this one. If you want this sense of adventure, this one. That's really what it comes down to in this Versus. Both great games, both great cards, great production. They're from the same company, but they're both living card games, but they're very different living card games. And in this video, I'm just giving the edge to the Lord of the Rings.